David, do you want to tell us what the current version of the big box says with regard to accountability?
Yeah, bearing in mind, this isn't a training course, and I'm not here
Mm.
to teach granny to suck eggs. The point we've defined, we've had a go at defining these things in the book, and we've just picked the ISO 37000 version to share. That accountability is an obligation to another to fulfill for fulfillment of the responsibility. So it's who does the buck stop with? Just a couple of points. Without clarity and without it being visible, we can't manage it. And we unless you have the authority, the resources, and the support, then it's not fair. So one of our it has to be clear, has to be visible to the business so they understand. Clear to me, visible to the business, and fair, so it doesn't grind people down when they're lumbered with a poison chalice. So again, we're looking to make sure that our culture and our operation makes authority clear, that explains to people what they're meant to do as well as what they're meant to achieve, and that so if you're accountable, then someone holds you to account, and that whole process is operated. It's not just a chat that you have between you and your line manager. The process of managing accountability is what's underpins delivery completely, and we grow up with our view as to what accountability is and how we should work it. Um, so that's the stimulus. The stimulus is there. Chris has got his hand up, so I guess, but while people start chipping in, Chris, maybe you make your point.
Yeah, very simple point. I think that first statement in the definition serves to confuse accountability and responsibility.
The ISO 37001 one.
Yep. Doesn't matter. It's not clear enough for me, and I think with where the second point comes in on clarity, I think we need to have absolute clarity in the definition. And I like your what you said in explaining it, which is this is where the buck stops.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't argue with ISO 37000. There's cleverer people than me, but I think you're right. The clarity.
I'm too dumb to not argue with them.
But it's clarity, isn't it? It's clarity, so we can take accountability of it. But we need to expect of the business that they empower us, and that I guess if we're going to be empowered with resources, leadership, time, and funds, then that implies, and this is a big one. Maybe Stuart's got something to say. It implies that to manage accountability, we have to prioritize. If we can't prioritize, how can I give people resources, funds, and leadership time? Because that prioritization process hasn't worked. So I don't know what
Stuart's popped it in the
people think
chat.
of
He
that.
says, I think the fairness point is key. It implies you have clear priorities and resource allocation.
So if you can't operate prioritization, how can you allocate resources, leadership, times, and funds to an accountable person in a fair way?
It's also what you said about poison chalices earlier, that certainly earlier in my career, everybody was dodging around to make sure they didn't get the poison chalice. But the poor person who did receive the poison chalice didn't seem to get any further support. It was like, you've got the black spot, you're not getting your bonus this year. So that was unfair accountability.
Yeah, and that reinforces the consequence and reward point we mentioned earlier. But it has to be fair. It has to be fair. And
Yes.
if you can't prioritize, then how can five people who you're sharing resources between have a commitment to them that they can rely on?
Yep. Oh,
Who
both
had the hand up
Chris's.
next? I think it was either Chris B
Brag.
or Chris W.
It was Chris
Mr.
B.
Bragg. Chris, it's you.
You're on mute, Chris.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Took my hand down, but didn't unmute. So I think a key thing here also is this accountability is really something that needs to be proactive, right? Yes, it's all very well to say we have consequences, but that's too late, right? So what we need to be able to do is to, in a very proactive way, know where to look for direction and to seek that decisions or whatever, and make sure that those decisions can be implemented. And I think the point of having clear accountability and governance is that we've got a way that we can actually make that happen in a proactive fashion.
It's operating it, isn't it? It's almost making sure that this operates and it's not sporadic or
Yeah,
chaotic.
it should be flowing. And the key thing is that we've got to get one person to make a decision on whatever that is or what level it is. But they also need to understand who else they need to speak to before they make that decision. Because if we're talking here about integrated governance, it may well be there's one place who has to make the decision and be accountable. But there's probably a lot of other places that are going to be impacted, and she needs to involve that before coming to that decision. And I think that's another key part of accountability is understanding who else you need to speak to before you make the decision.
So there's a connection there between accountability and decisions, and as well as accountability and outcome. But Chris Walters,
we're talking here about governance, and that is about making decisions. And the accountability, we're saying who is the person who's going to make the decision.
Yeah, so it's not just an end game. Accountability isn't an end game thing. When you get to the end of something, it happens throughout. If you're making decision 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to your outcome, then you can't just wait to get to the outcome and discover that someone's not been accountable. It's the whole way through.
Yeah,
I think that's what you're implying.
That is accountability. I think is making decisions, and that's why also it's so important that if we're going to hold people accountable for making decisions, they also need to be able to implement decisions. Otherwise, it's pointless.
Chris Walters, do you have a quick point? I've got some quick, snappy other things to throw up.
Actually got two quick points. One in response to Chris B. The accountability in race, and I put this in chat earlier, accountability in RACI goes hand in hand very much with the D in Bain and Company's rapid decision-making framework. And there's a very clear linkage there in my mind. The second point, which was the original one I put my hand up for, was around I think there's a real subtlety between being given accountability and taking accountability. And my view is that there's a negotiation. If an individual, a capable individual, is not prepared to take accountability for something, then there is something probably in that accountability that is not fair or clear. So that's really and so how many senior people will actually put their hand up and say that is not something I can take accountability for because I haven't got the wherewithal to actually become accountable. So in my mind, accountability is always taken, and sometimes it's taken stupidly.
You have to be confident that the ecosystem that you take accountability from isn't going to stiff you. So it's having the wherewithal, but it's also having the confidence that you're not going to suffer as a consequence of taking it, and that you're able to act.
I've never heard a senior person in senior forums say, I can't be accountable for that because I can't deliver it. Never heard it.
Is that a culture issue? Because sometimes possibly they can't deliver it. They just take it anyway.
I don't care one way or the other, but it's saving the endeavor up to setting the endeavor up to fail.
Yeah.
If the accountable person actually knows that they're winging it.
Yeah. Cultural issue again. Guys, I've got to skip through. So if there are more questions,
Not,
there'll
not
more
good
of a
for your
chance.
career to say you don't accept accountability.
Well, indeed, that's the culture, isn't it? The environment isn't good, so you don't want to take it, or you take it falsely. So let's just quickly, and Veronica, Victoria, I see you got your hand up, so chip in. Let me just get through this bit. So that we got this notion in big that we have accountability nodes, a point at which the accountability invests accountability. So we identify these places, and we've got some examples. They make ownership visible, they prevent gaps, so we can spot gaps if there are gaps. Build effective governance and assurance around it. Be able to trace. And the idea of the accountability node is that we have all these things around it that are clear. So maybe business case and plan. So we have an objective, at least one, with a priority that has a business case that I can take ownership of. That I'm delegated authority to the right level, such that I can then do what I need to do. There's an accountable person, and that's been set up by receipt of leadership steer. I've got plans and controls to be able to get that carried out. I've got stakeholders I have to satisfy. I need funds and resources, and I might have to work with other teams in the business to get that. But without that enablement, the accountability is unfair. So what do you guys think of that diagram? Does that summarize it as to what this point of accountability needs to be aware of? Have I missed anything?
I agree with everything you've put. I can't see anything that you've missed, but that doesn't mean that something hasn't been missed, but that looks pretty comprehensive to me.
So that's in a nutshell, this concept of a point of accountability, an accountability node. So we need to be clear about what these are. So again, we've got a couple of minutes to chip in if anybody wants to question or comment on that idea. If it's kind of accepted, then I'll just move on because we're short of time.
I would be interested in thinking whether one of the problems with larger organizations is whether the number of nodes is directly proportional to the size of the organization, or when you get a bigger organization, do you actually start having to have more nodes proportionately, if you see what I mean? Is this whole thing a diseconomy of scale, and one of the reasons that limits how large organizations grow, because the paths of accountability become too vague, and you start having problems due to the sheer size of organizations working out who's responsible or accountable for what.
I guess larger organizations will have more points of accountability. It's inevitable. But then you've got, if you're in charge of something, you might be in charge of a small team, or you might be in charge of a department with team leaders, or in charge of a business unit with a few departments. There's a hierarchy here and a cascade, isn't there?
Yes, I'm just thinking about my time at Network Rail. They were very organised with this sort of thing. They had big teams of sponsors who seemed to be very skilled people, and they had a lot of racy charts covering different work. The problem was that I think that the racy charts and things and job role responsibilities just simply couldn't cover everything that actually needed to be done. There was just too many interfaces and too much that needed to be done, and they just all the work wasn't covered by the racy charts. It was just too big a task.
Well, to manage that and develop it manually is a bit tough, but maybe the AI is going to help us. But Stuart, you have you finished mowing yet?
No, the mower died. So I'm
You had
enjoying
your hand up.
the evening sunshine. Yes. So sort of following on from that, actually, it's a question for the group rather than a point, which is, so I like this node idea, right? I think we could probably all nod along with that one. But my question is, how do you get all the nodes working together, right? So you might have a node that's responsible for a business outcome, another node that's accountable for utilization rates or BAU activity, and somehow you got to coordinate all these nodes. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Can I hold that thought, because that's what Alex is going to cover in a second. But yeah, we
All
have
right.
that's coming.
You're good, man.
Chris, have you got an additional point? We'll move on to the next little sub piece in
Yeah,
this.
well, I think it's just very much the same that I was saying. I think what was missing from the diagram was the fact that it needs to have inputs and outputs to other nodes.
Yeah,
So
that
this
just
needs to
describes the
open
node
up
itself. There's
synchronization.
yeah, the context isn't in that diagram. So on that point then, Alex, accountability map. It's the visualization of how all this shizzle goes together that we either manually create and try and maintain, or use in the modern world, use AI to construct and manage it for us. But let's not go there. Alex, sorry.
Okay. Well, you got to map your accountability. So at one level, somebody who is responsible at the level below might be accountable. You need to clearly show your authorities, your dependencies, how the governance flows, how other things like information flows. It's just about making things clear and explicit. So that means that people who want to wiggle out of things can't wiggle out of them, but people who want to understand how the organization actually works can see a clear map. And please be aware this is different to an org chart. There might be similarities to your org chart, but do not assume that your org chart is an accountability map. So what lovely things has David typed here? Hierarchy of objectives and key results. Bingo. Organization structure, dependency map, obligation flow, graph database based solutions enable exploration of relationships. Sorry, David, can you explain that one for me, please?
It's just an AI implication. We've seen people come up with solutions that can ingest our obligations, constraints, and dependencies, and enable us to visualize that and be able to manage that picture. So, although we've created this illustration of what we mean by an accountability map, and shown it here as a Visio or maybe a PowerPoint, we know there's better tech available to allow us to see how everything works. So the key thing is getting that. It was exactly to Stuart's point. It's like knowing what one node of accountability is fine, but how does this all fit together? How do we operate this? How do we orchestrate ourselves so that this can all fit together and not fall apart?
So I think that this is a great example, but I want to emphasize that it's an extremely simplistic example.
Yeah.
So when I think back to organizations I've worked in, this map, instead of having 10 nodes or 12 nodes, whatever it is on it, could easily have a couple of hundred nodes. And when we've printed it out on multiple sheets of A3, like an old-fashioned PERT chart, that's for the older people who are attending here, would easily fill a two-story wall. So is it important? Yes. Is it complex? Definitely.
Definitely.
If you don't have this visual diagram, however big and complex the visual diagram is, how do people really understand what the accountability relationships are? And I'm a big person for a picture paints 1,000 words. And I think if you can map this on one diagram, however or enormous, it will help enormously with everybody understanding who they are, what they're doing, who is dependent on what they're doing. Right. I've waffled on enough. And
Stuart's
David,
yeah,
I was
Stuart's
going
got a
to.
comment, Alex, and it was around if it's so many nodes and so complex, how is it a useful tool for understanding? I guess you wouldn't use a big diagram with thousands of nodes to try and understand. You'd kind of build that so you can then filter and sort and focus on the stuff that's important to you. but it's like I guess developing and managing that manually is going to be tough. So we're gonna have we're gonna this is a capability perhaps that we can get our AI capabilities to help us with to manage this picture and establish and maintain the relationships in a picture that we can't do manually because we're not quick enough and we can't conceive ourselves. Um, Chris
Okay.
Walters, do you have one last comment? I was going to move on and just cover the last bit.
Oh,
We've got to shift up and move on and get
ju-
Geo talking.
just the last minute or two has opened up so many cans of worms.
Yeah,
Firstly, um, this looks very, very similar to what might be one layer overlay against enterprise architecture.
yeah,
However, there are so few organizations that can be bothered or have the spare capacity to either create or maintain an enterprise architecture are very, very slim. And then this then goes down to Stuart's point. Well, with so many nodes, so how do you filter them? This, in my mind, is actually the governance question, which is a bit iterative. Um, how do you know if something needs to be governed? And the answer is because it's important enough to be governed. And
yeah,
and I know that's circular, but it implies some kind of um, prioritization of what is most important to be able to say, hang on a minute, let's take a conscious decision here
yeah,
rather than delegate it down randomly. So
yeah,
putting those two together, it means I think you have to have a cut-off of granularity or a cut-off of impact on what you do in terms of both accountability maps and also enterprise architecture designs, because you just can't create that model of everything. It's what physicists have been trying to do for hundreds of years, and they've still not got anywhere. But they can tell you about the minute detail, but not how it actually fits together. And I think that's a fundamental challenge for doing maps such as this. You've got to draw the line. You've got to take the biggest
yeah,
hits.
yeah. And I think in the future, let the AI help you develop and manage that.
I
That's
have a bit of an issue with that in that AI can't see it all, and it almost certainly can't prioritize well enough. And if you're
no, can't
letting your
prioritize.
organizational operation be defined by AI that is not all seeing and all doing,
Yeah,
then good luck.
no, I don't think anyone would say that. It's it's a help you see, find out where this is. But we got to. There's more to move on, but the concept here is we know about nodes. We got to understand how it fits together, and that there'll be a level of capability we have as humans that we can achieve that with, and there's a level of viability as to how we go into that, and that's it. But the question is, um, the point is for many people, for many people right now, the level of oversight and integration vision they have isn't adequate to stay on top of strategy delivery and commercial viability in some cases. So it's how far do you go, and that's a choice. Um,
Completely agree.
so the last bit then is just to talk about one more concept very briefly because I've got to shut up and let move on. But we got this idea of model agendas. So if you run projects or products or a department, then we got this idea that in operating governance there are typical information sets that we need. So if we have um, uh, for an individual decision, this isn't quite the issue. But if I have a point of accountability, if I'm accountable for a project, a program, a product, a department it'll have objectives and targets that relate to it. There'll be policy and process that I have to follow. In understanding and operating that accountability, I'll need to make decisions. I'll need information on performance, on forecast, on issues and risks. I'll need information to my fingertips. I'll need to understand what's been escalated to me. I'll need to be able to communicate decisions and actions, to communicate generally about the point of accountability and escalate to other areas. So the point here is that a lot of the stuff we need to you choose to be accountable and operate accountability and operate governance. A lot of this stuff should be pretty standard and regular. And surely we can come together on standards for some of that to make this process of managing the information and establishing the dependencies a little bit easier for all of us, rather than creating our own standards, our own information sets, and so on. And I think Gio is probably going to talk about some of this stuff in a bit. But there are examples. If you're a big member, then in the big website, in the full member resources, there's a whole lot of examples of what these things are. So anyone got a quick comment about this concept? We're just running out of time to go into it in any great depth. Anybody want to chip in?
I think we should move on, David. I think that's beautiful positioning. I think we're already starting to touch on next section, which is the ecosystem in which this stuff operates. So